this is Ellie Masters, and I hope you're enjoying this free audio exclusive of Rescuing Melissa, the first book in my Guardian Hostage Rescue Specialist series. It's a spine-tingling thriller and steamy romance all rolled into one, and I like to think of it as Romantic Suspense meets Silence of the Lambs.
JEM Publishing presents the unabridged recording of Rescuing Melissa, the Guardian Hostage Rescue Specialists, Book 1, written by Ellie Masters, narrated by Aubrey Vincent and Matt Haynes. 41. Van. Melissa. Melissa woke to a sudden lurching sensation. She tried putting a hand out to steady herself, only to find her wrists connected to her ankles by a chain running through something strapped around her neck. Her body was bent over double. Was that a collar around her neck? Terror welled up inside her, and she suppressed the horrible mewling sound desperately crawling out of her throat. Kidnapped. She remembered everything, but couldn't wrap her mind around what was happening. Why had the delivery man kidnapped her? Had Scott orchestrated this? Her hip protested being pressed against the hard metal floor, and her bruised ribs complained. Thick leather wrapped around her wrists and ankles. She could work the buckles with her teeth, but locks stopped her cold. Something smooth wrapped around her neck, and a chain from her wrists went right to it. A quick inspection revealed she was in the back of a van. The windows had been blacked out. She was alone except for hundreds of roses tossed toward the front. She gagged against the overwhelming rose perfume. CJ had warned her to be careful. He told her not to trust anyone. Why had she been so stupid? But he texted her. Fear filled her, but she refused to let it rule her emotions. If CJ and his friends were a tenth as good as she hoped, she needed to hold it together until they arrived. Shivers went down her spine when a garage door rattled in its tracks. The van moved forward, and then the door lowered with a crash. A few minutes later, the door latch to the back of the van clicked. She squeezed her eyes shut and prayed for strength. Bright light filtered through her eyelids. She opened them a crack, craned her neck, and squinted at her captor.
"Good. I'm glad you're awake,"
he said.
"I tried to make the ride as smooth as possible. How do you feel?"
She remained silent. Maybe she should scream? But who would hear?
"You'll have to forgive the bindings, but it's for your safety."
Her safety? There were so many things she wanted to say. Bastard? Freak? What the hell are you doing? Don't touch me? Instead, she remained quiet, afraid he'd hurt her if she screamed.
"I've waited for this moment for so long."
His eyes glistened. She couldn't bear to look at him and squeezed her eyes shut.
"I've tried to get you to join me so many times, and it seemed like it would never work out, but you're with me now. You have no idea how special this day is."
Hypnotic didn't even begin to describe his tone. His words wrapped around her, seeped into her, made her want to believe every foul thing he said. She shook her head to clear it from his spell. He leaned forward, and she flinched when he touched her.
"It would be best if you learned not to do that, my queen. It makes me mad, and we don't want that."
What would he do when he got mad? His face hovered mere inches away. And why did he keep calling her his queen? What did that mean? Scott had had princesses. Was there a connection between her husband and this man? His smile unnerved her, sending her stomach into a terrifying freefall. Okay, there was a little bit of crazy going on here, which didn't bode well for her chances. Please, CJ. Please find me. Save me. The delivery man pulled her into his arms, lifting her with little effort, and snuggled her close to his chest. He breathed deeply, as if inhaling her essence, and savoring a moment he had anticipated for far too long.
"Don't be afraid, my queen. I am yours just as surely as you are mine. I will take care of you."
His words made her skin crawl. She tried to headbutt him, but the chain attached to her neck kept her immobile. "Let me go." The words rushed from her lips, pushed out by her subconscious. He shook his head.
"My queen, you are destined to be mine, fated to serve. I've waited years, and now you're finally here.
She scrunched her forehead, trying to make sense of his insanity.
I'll take care of you for now and for always. Come, I will carry you across the threshold just like in the stories of old. You will be my queen and I your king. I am so excited to have you join us.
Us?
Yes, my queen. Your court awaits.
A roaring sound filled her head. She could hear nothing except for the blood pounding past her ears, giving her an instant, nearly incapacitating headache. This was Scott all over again. Only this time, she wasn't an oblivious wife. She had become a victim. She struggled, but bound as she was, her movements amounted to nothing. He carried her through a mudroom and into a kitchen, then jerked to a stop.
What the hell are you doing here? Hello, sissy?
Scott stood in her abductor's kitchen, his face full of a triumphant smile. Melissa screamed. 42. Evil. Melissa. An unrelenting drumbeat banged away inside Melissa's chest. Combined with the electric charge running over her skin, her entire body vibrated with the need to run, to fight, to do something. But she couldn't move. Melissa was trapped by chains and cuffs and the prison of her captor's arms. She tried chasing away her fear, but the man standing before her made her blood run cold. Scott had found her. Breathing became a struggle, one she was losing, and she couldn't pull enough air. The hammering of her pulse deafened her and raced past her ears in one terrifying roar. With a blink, she tried to force the blackness, shrouding her vision away, but the smothering weight of Scott's presence made that impossible. She kicked against her bonds, a futile effort. Pierce had her trussed up so well she could barely move.
My, Pierce Channing,
Scott said with a taunting smile.
As I live and breathe, you've brought me the perfect get-out-of-jail gift.
She squeezed her legs together and drew inward, trying to hide from Scott's view. Panic had a hold of her, setting her stomach to churning and bringing whimpers to her throat. Her heartbeat wavered. A weak, fluttering thing and a scream struggled to be free, but she smothered the sound. Why hadn't she listened to CJ and kept that damn door shut? Scott crossed his arms and gave one of his cruel smiles. His gaze drifted over her body, moving with measured purpose and traveling at a languid pace from her feet to her breasts, finally to settle on her face. She met his stare with as much strength as she could muster, but her determination to meet him head-on skittered away. Pierce adjusted his grip, hefting her in his arms, and shifting her ever so slightly away from Scott. Such an odd embrace. She should be frightened by her kidnapper, but found herself burrowing against his chest, anything to get away from her ex-husband. A deep groan rumbled outward from Scott, needful, raw, possessive, and terrifying. His masculine jaw was set with purpose, and there was no confusion about what he wanted. There had once been a time when she had believed him to be a handsome man. Power, wealth, and a raw beauty had drawn her to him. In many ways, he had been her Prince Charming, until he became a brutal killer. Now she cringed, desperate to flee. All she could see was the hardness of his eyes and the depravity of the psychopath he'd become. A sharp tick-tick-tock grated on her nerves. A grandfather clock sat in the hall and announced the time with 3 long peals of its bells. She twitched with the noise, jumping with each beat. Pierce shifted, taking another step back.
Should I be surprised you're in my home?
Her captor's voice wavered between anger and awe.
In the flesh.
Scott spread his arms. Light glinted off his $1,000 smile.
Risky coming here.
Recrimination floated in the unusual timbre of his tone. Held by Pierce, Melissa couldn't move. Even if he put her down, she was bound in chains. Her gaze cut from Pierce to Scott and back again, feeling every bit trapped.
I needed a place to stay, and I couldn't think of a better person who understood me.
A devilish smile spread across his lips. Melissa's muscles ached from her contorted position, The pain settled into an unrelenting throb. Scott closed the distance, the ticking of the clock, the strike of his heels against the floor, her ragged breathing. They all combined into one thunderous roar. She'd never forget the sound of his distinctive walk. Seeking protection in her kidnapper's arms made no sense, but she tucked her head against Pierce's chest and felt his ribcage expand with a sharp pull of his breath. He held it for a beat, then expelled it in a rush. Seeking protection from her kidnapper? She had gone mad. Scott approached and brushed her chin, his fingers rough and calloused, nothing like the smooth manicure he'd once sported. Their gazes locked. His stare promised retribution, and she wanted nothing more than to disappear. Pierce stood rock steady when all she wanted was for him to yank her away from her ex-husband. The two men exchanged a glance, more of a glare. Two predators and only one prey. She jerked her chin out of Scott's grasp, turning again toward Pierce. She didn't know his brand of crazy, but Scott's was undeniable. Scott reached out and pinched her chin, increasing the pressure until she had no choice but to turn and face him. Pierce still hadn't moved, and he let Scott paw at her. The depth of her kidnapper's breathing intensified, and the beat of his heart pounded against her chest. He didn't appear happy having a serial killer in his home, but he wasn't making a move to get rid of Scott.
My beautiful bride, how I have missed you.
Scott kissed her with a light brush of his lips. Melissa bucked, thrashing in her captor's arms.
Be still.
Pierce's grip tightened. Why didn't he step back and pull her away? Her mind screamed, one long, piercing wail confined to the inside of her skull. She was going to die. She didn't want to die, not when she'd found CJ. CJ, please, find me, save me, don't let him hurt me. A growl sounded low in Scott's throat. Then he leaned forward, invading her space to give one of his punishing kisses, the ones he saved when he wanted her to feel pain. He pulled back, leaving her lower lip bruised and pulsing.
Have you missed me?
He sneered. Her lower lip quivered and her limbs trembled. Nothing of the man she had once loved remained in the person standing before her now. Scott believed in a wife's duty to love, honor, and obey. Even more than her duty, he believed it his right to ensure her obedience by any means he saw fit, by the cruelty of his words, by the absence of his affection, but more often by his hand or belt. She sucked in a deep lungful of air. He always made her feel small. He turned his attention to Pierce.
You did extend an invitation.
Pierce had the strength of steel because he showed no signs of tiring, holding her in his arms. He brushed her temple with a kiss of his own. The tenderness in his lips sent a shiver down her spine because it had been protective, possessive, and terrifying. Scott's eyes narrowed.
My invitation was for if you were ever released. You weren't released. You escaped.
Pierce measured his words.
I'm not interested in helping a fugitive.
Scott's eyes flared.
An act of God set me free. Besides, I knew you'd be collecting my bride. I couldn't imagine leaving town without seeing my sissy one last time.
Melissa's breath caught in her throat. His nickname had never been one she liked. It used to grate on her nerves, but now it portended her death. One last time?
She belongs to me now.
Pierce ground out.
You gave her to me.
The warning in Pierce's tone was unmistakable, the possession undeniable. Melissa stilled in Pierce's arms. He was the only thing keeping her away from Scott and his twisted desires. She pressed her cheek against Pierce's chest and felt his breathing hitch. Scott shrugged and gave a dismissive wave.
Of course she's yours now.
He tried to appear nonchalant, but Melissa knew he'd never give her away, at least not while he still pulled breath. Had that been it? How long had these two been in communication? And how horrible for Scott to have seen to her future after his death. The twisted bastard would have done something like this.
Do I need to remind you she's still my wife? You gave her to me.
The confidence in Pierce's voice faded.
Technically, I had no choice.
A slick smile spread across Scott's face. He held his hands out.
Look, we need not argue.
A snicker filled Scott's voice.
She'll be your queen. I don't want her anymore. I only ask for one last night, and I'm sure you won't mind.
If Scott was done with her. A shiver worked down her spine and shot to her fingertips.
She's no good, dead.
Pierce ground out. The air crackled with the intensity of these two men squaring off against each other. Melissa cringed. If Pierce gave her to Scott, she wouldn't survive the night. As much as the idea made her gut churn, she had to play Pierce against Scott. But how?
I have no intention of killing her, but she needs to pay.
There was a hitch in Scott's voice that turned her stomach.
I'm serious. I want her alive.
Scott took a few steps back.
After everything I taught you, you owe me this much.
Melissa struggled to breathe. She lifted her bound hands as best she could and clutched at the fabric of Pierce's shirt. He was her only hope. A whimper escaped her throat. Pierce hugged her tight and kissed the top of her head. She found the act oddly comforting. Pierce whispered into her ear,
I'll keep you safe, my queen, I promise.
Please, she whispered. Don't let him have me. Scott pointed an accusatory finger at Pierce.
After everything I taught you, after helping you build your collection, you owe me. It takes one phone call to bring this all down.
Pierce's voice dropped an octave, ice coating his words, turning them hard and brittle.
Exactly. Only one phone call to end it all.
A phone. That's what she needed. If she could only find a phone, get out of Pierce's arms. And do what? Crawl? She wouldn't be able to reach a phone. Hers had been left in the hotel. She prayed CJ found it. Until then, she needed to stall for time and give CJ a chance. She pressed her cheek against Pierce's chest. Please, don't let him touch me. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. His low murmur made her skin crawl.
My dearest queen, have faith in your king.
Hope chased the fear flowing in her veins. He would save her, but for what fate?
Then we understand each other?
There was a tremor in Scott's voice. He'd been a successful lawyer once, a theatric player who'd ruled the courtroom. She used to love watching him argue his cases. Even in the most heated cases, Scott never lost his cool. It had made him seem powerful, sexy even. He never backed down, and she'd never seen another man dominate him. Until now. That quaver in his voice was the first time she'd heard a thread of uncertainty from him. Any man who could off-balance Scott was someone to fear. But in choosing one evil over another, was she making an even worse mistake?
Tell me what you want.
Pierce readjusted his hold.
I want to punish her for turning me in to the cops. I want to hear her scream. Give me that and I'll leave. That's all? And you'll go? Not all. Share one of your princesses. Prison makes for quite a dry spell. I'm itching to fuck a real woman.
Wait, there were other women trapped here? Pierce had mentioned a court awaited.
Share.
There was that pause again, a hitch in Pierce's words.
I'm certain we can come to some arrangement. We differ in our definition of what it means to have a woman.
Pierce warned.
And I've told you that soft spot in your heart will be your undoing. If one of them ever gets out, they're never getting out.
Melissa twitched in the steel embrace of Pierce's arms. Confidence oozed from his pores, and if none of them could get out, what would happen to her?
No killing. You can fuck one, but that's it. Well, not just fuck. I know what toys you keep in that dungeon of yours. Tell me it hasn't been your fantasy to watch me in action. We could take them together, the master and the student. Our idea of fun is different. Don't worry. I'm not here to take over your little kingdom. All I want is a moment with my wife and something to fuck instead of my hand."
She clawed at Pierce, desperate for his protection. Pierce's eyes narrowed. Melissa prayed he would refuse. If he didn't, they were both dead. Hopefully Pierce was smart enough to figure that out. Another brush of his lips had her skin crawling.
"Forgive me, but I must allow this,"
Pierce whispered. He met Scott's stare and firmed his voice with the power of command, one psycho attempting to dominate another.
"You stop when I say stop."
Her hopes faded with those words.
"Then what are we waiting for?"
Scott rubbed his hands together, anticipation lighting his eyes. He wanted her pain. No matter what he did, no matter how much it hurt, she would not cry. Her fear would feed the beast inside of him. God help her if she screamed. Melissa's insides churned in a tight knot. Her mind screamed to flee, to fight, to get the hell out of there, but Pierce's cuffs and chains and the prison of his arms trapped her with no way out. There had to be neighbors, but she kept silent. Any foolish attempt would be her last. She needed to be smart, not stupid. Scott turned and paced the long length of the kitchen, scrubbing at his sandy blonde hair. He opened the refrigerator and pulled out a cold beer. Each time he drew near, her heart fluttered with renewed panic. As long as Pierce held her, Scott couldn't touch her.
"Want one?"
Scott acted as if he owned the place, playing host to the man whose home he'd invaded. The bottle hissed as Scott popped the cap. The noise had Melissa cringing. He tipped the long neck back and took a pull.
"No, I'm good."
Pierce's teeth made a grinding sound. Scott wiped his mouth with the back of his hand.
"God, I've missed beer."
He pointed the bottle at Melissa.
"What are we waiting for?"
This time, she couldn't hold back the whimper and turned her cheek to Pierce. The move had been instinctual. She coiled inward, preparing to defend against Scott's sadistic pleasure.
"I want to make sure we understand each other."
Pierce's hands gripped painfully against her bruised ribs. Melissa bit back a cry, but didn't know why she bothered. Scott meant her to pay, and she would drown in screams.
"Damn, this is good."
Scott slammed his half-empty beer on the granite counter. Pierce Channing was a mystery she needed to crack. He kidnapped her, bound her, and there was no doubt he planned horrible things. But he seemed protective, and she sensed he didn't relish handing her over to Scott. There had to be a way to use that to her advantage. She snuggled into his chest and whispered, "Please don't let him hurt me." Pierce kissed her forehead.
"I can't say no. Not to him. You must understand." "Understand what?"
Scott asked.
"What did she say?"
He tipped the bottle and drained it. The refrigerator door opened again, and he pulled out a second bottle. She placed her cheek against Pierce's chest. "Please?"
"Don't worry, my queen. I will stop him if he goes too far."
No, she needed him not to allow it at all. She needed an ally, and right now, her kidnapper was her best bet for making it through this alive. There was no doubt in her mind what would happen if Pierce left her alone with Scott.
"Beer and sex,"
Scott said.
"Two things you don't get in prison. I'm ready to see this dungeon of yours. I want to see how you improved on my design. Show me your kingdom."
Melissa startled. How close did the similarities go between these two? Had Scott been coaching Pierce from prison? Bile rose in her throat, but she swallowed it down. Pierce gestured to the second beer.
"If you're going to punish my queen, you'll do it with a clear head."
He spoke about her impending torture with a calmness she found chilling, reminding her that he, too, was a predator, a man she should fear, not an ally against her ex-husband.
"She's lousy in bed. I'm just warning you. Lays there like a limp fish. Why do you think I had to find my princesses? I know why you want her, and as honored as I am by that, I have to wonder why."
Lousy? He'd been the one who relegated her to one sexual position, who refused to let her touch him with her hands or mouth. Ugh, the thought of anything sexual regarding Scott brought a vile taste to her mouth. He'd been her first, and until recently her only sexual experience. He'd been the one who had stunted her sexual awakening. Lousy. Scott had been the most selfish of lovers. Pierce's jaw clenched again.
I enjoy the challenge of breaking them and training them. She'll serve me well when I'm done.
Pierce would never have a chance, because Scott would kill her first. She wasn't sure which of them was the most repugnant, the kidnapper or the killer. Scott tilted his head.
Never understood why you keep them around. Huge liability. I say have your fun and get rid of them. Make it clean and neat.
Pierce chuckled.
Look where that got you.
Scott's eyes flickered with an unsettled emotion. He finished his beer and tossed it in the trash.
Are we going to chit-chat all day? I'm horny as hell and tired of doing all the work.
He fisted his hand and jerked it over his crotch, pumping in and out. He'd never been so crude. Prison had changed him. His actions nearly had her vomiting in her mouth. Would he want to have sex with her? But he hadn't asked Pierce's permission for that. A shudder rolled through her body.
I get the picture.
Pierce smiled. Not a kind smile, but something much darker.
And you only cane this one 10 times. She deserves 100, 10, 50, 10.
Pierce insisted. Scott's eyes narrowed. Like a piece of meat at an auction house, her fate was being argued by the insane. She may not have long to live, but she'd be damned if she'd die like a piece of cattle. You don't deserve to touch me. A bold and stupid thing to say, but she couldn't remain silent.
20.
Her husband said with a glower.
And you'll feel every strike, my dear.
Pierce shook his head.
I've seen what you can do with a cane. 10 strikes.
Testosterone surged in the air, swirling with festering depravity as two psychopaths puffed out their chests. She expected Scott to win. He always did. Please, she turned to Pierce. He doesn't deserve me.
I've earned this!
Her husband screamed. His face turned beet red, and he advanced with his arm upraised. Pierce turned, shifting her away.
Be careful. My terms are non-negotiable. She's no good to me, a cripple.
He angled his face down to look at her.
I would suggest silence, my queen.
His muscles tensed. A sharp ache knifed in her chest. Caught between crazy and crazier, she gave a slight nod and acquiesced.
As you wish. 10. But I can use my hand as much as I want.
Scott gave a grunt of displeasure, but he had caved to Pierce's demands. Melissa breathed a sigh of relief. As crazy as it seemed, she had an ally in Pierce. She was lifted a few inches as Pierce shrugged.
Stay away from her face.
Scott came close once again, exhaling a fume of hops. His fetid breath overwhelmed her. He yanked on the collar around her throat, forcing her head off Pierce's shoulder.
You have been disobedient, sissy. You should have protected your husband as I protected you.
You never protected me. The urge to add, you crazy bastard, had been hard to suppress, but Melissa wasn't a complete fool. He placed a finger over her lips.
Don't speak. It's just a waste of breath. You're not going to change what happens next.
He took a step back.
Show me your dungeon, my Padawan.
Pierce headed for a door off the kitchen.
43. Sketch artist. CJ. When the FBI profiler finished with Angela, CJ tried to get Anna out of the swing. She didn't want to let go of the chains, insisting he push her just one more time. He gave her 3 more pushes, sending her high into the air. Then he pulled her swing to a halt and coaxed the little girl off the playground. Leaving Anna in the capable hands of Mrs. Collins, he tried to engage Angela in a contest of who could swing the highest. Angela didn't want to play and walked off the playground to stand beside a bench. CJ followed, taking a seat on the far end. Angela pretended a deep interest in the grass at her feet. then bent to pick up a stick. She hit the back of the bench, jarring his teeth with each strike. He brushed off his trousers and stood, giving her the space she needed. Anna might be young enough to really not understand, but Angela held the wisdom of an older soul. He remembered what that knowledge felt like. He'd been older, 15 years young, and his circumstances had been much different, although no less challenging. His father killed his mother while he watched. The memory haunted him and had been improved only slightly by what happened next. Rage powered the adolescent jangle of his limbs and developing muscles to action. Fury fueled the need to stop his father. But what he remembered was feeling cheated because his fists hadn't killed the old man. He'd been smaller, weaker, and knew he wouldn't last in an all-out brawl. But he'd been smart and gone for the gun. The shot rang out before it registered that he pulled the trigger. His arm jerked, and then he blinked. Half his father's face disappeared, and the ringing in his ears lasted until the police came. His moment of retribution had been stolen in that one shot. All his anger bubbled to the surface and struggled for an outlet. He wanted to beat his father into submission, but the focus of his hatred lay dead on the floor. There'd been no satisfaction because his father hadn't suffered. Angela faced a different grief, but no less powerful. She'd seen the face of her mother's potential killer. Growing up in foster care wasn't easy, and he didn't envy Angela the trials that might bring. He'd like to think Henrietta Jones was still alive, but he knew how these things usually ended. Angela lifted her face and blinked against the sun.
My mom isn't dead.
She pointed the stick at him.
You think she is. Mrs. Collins and those cops do too, but she's not. My mom is strong, stronger than you know. She's going to come home.
Wetness pooled at the corners of her eyes, but her cheeks remained dry. Her upper lip was set with her conviction. He held his hands up, unwilling to crush her hope. I never said your mother wouldn't come home. Her chin trembled. I see her in you. Her strength is written in your eyes. She threw the stick toward the playground.
Do you think that man had something to do with Mom going away?
He knelt down, eye level with the girl. Angela, why don't you like this man? She shrugged.
I don't know.
He turned to keep an eye on Anna, who spoke with great enthusiasm to the sketch artist. His watch showed 3:30. The backup team should be at the hotel by now. Melissa was safe, and he didn't need to worry about leaving her alone anymore. Jenny's cell phone buzzed, and he fished it out of his pocket. Mac, what's up? Where are you? A terseness clipped Mac's words. Sitting in a park with two lovely little girls. The sketch artist is finishing with the younger one. He pinched his brows together and placed a hand over the spot above the bridge of his nose. A headache coiled behind his eyes, building with strength. It had been a long, unproductive day. You need to get back to the hotel. What happened? Melissa's gone. The team arrived and she wasn't in the room. His stomach churned with fear for her safety and rage for whoever had taken her. He would kill the fucker if he hurt Melissa. Keeping his voice even so as not to alarm Angela took every ounce of his self-control. He paced, needing to move, to act, to do something other than babysit two little girls at a goddamn park. First, he needed to calm down. He focused on Mac's deep voice. Did she leave, or was she taken? Taken. Struggle? Doors intact. She either knew the person or they convinced her to let them in. He understood the subtext, but didn't think Scott Patterson would be stupid enough to brave a public hotel with video surveillance and security. You coming? I'll be there. Maybe he could pawn the girls off on the sketch artist and head straight to the hotel. He cut the connection and tried to appear as if his entire world hadn't been snatched from under his feet. He held out a hand. Angela, let's get your sister. It's been a long day. "44. A lead. CJ. Mrs. Collins, do you think you could take the girls back to the shelter? The social services shelter was on the opposite side of town. It would take an hour to take the girls and return to the hotel. She shushed CJ, a look of intense concentration scrawled across her face.
I'm almost done.
You'd be doing me a huge favor. Time. He'd lost too much time. He would have left already if it weren't for Henrietta Jones. This sketch was the closest thing to a lead they had, and he couldn't abandon the girls' hopes of finding their mother. But damn, he hated wasting time. Anna, bless her talkative little mouth, would not shut up. Her inherent cuteness saved her hide, and he couldn't help but smile when she peeked at the drawing. Her actions were slowing the ponderous Mrs. Collins down. There was no choice but to wait. Angela stood beside him, displaying greater patience than him. His pacing drew stares from Mrs. Collins. Anything could be happening to Melissa. He hated this inaction. His pulse strummed with the need to do something. But he trusted Mac. Mac would coordinate the action at the hotel, gather witnesses, and scour surveillance tapes. Mac had probably assigned Jenny to the police detail, making sure they didn't foul the crime scene. And the rest of Delta Team was there too. Their help would be invaluable. He trusted them, but he wanted to be there. Mrs. Collins scratched at the drawing tablet. What was he to do with the girls? No way was he making the hour-long round trip to the shelter. With a flourish, she drew her last line.
It's done, Anna. Do you want to see?
Not a moment later, Anna was on her feet, peering over the sketch pad. She waved her hand, beckoning him forward.
Mr. CJ! Mr. CJ!
Her voice squeaked, demanding his immediate attention. He forced a smile. How does it look? Despite his worry over Melissa, he had this case to solve.
She did it! She did what you said!
Anna turned to him, eyes wide, her voice dropped to a whisper. A look of wonder filled her face.
She pulled him out of my head!
She jumped on the park bench, pointing at the sketch pad. Angela twisted her mouth and stomped around to look. She tilted her head and squinted. With a clucking sound, she said,
Anna, you made him look too nice.
CJ glanced at the drawing. An unremarkable man with a long face and narrow-set eyes stared out from the page. He looked vaguely familiar. Where had he seen that man before? Because he'd definitely seen him, and recently, too. He took another look at the two sketches, comparing them side by side. Angela's portrayed a much harder man than Anna's image. A skinny man jogging toward him. Where had that been? And why would a man be bringing him roses? Not him. CJ pinched his eyes, willing the memory to surface. The man had been running toward Melissa. He jerked as the memory unfolded. Red roses were bouncing in the grip of a skinny-ass guy. He had reacted, placing himself between Melissa and what he'd perceived as a threat. The look on the guy's face had seemed possessive, predatory even. CJ had adjusted his stance, balancing on the balls of his feet, ready to fight. Melissa had stepped around him. She'd placed a hand on his arm and pushed him to the side.
It's okay, CJ.
What did this man have to do with Henrietta Jones? He needed to get to his team. Mrs. Collins packed up and turned to Angela.
Do you want to see what I drew from your description?
Angela shook her head.
No.
She pointed at the pad of paper.
He looks like that, but weirder.
Every now and then, her eyes lifted to the sketch pad and fell back to the ground. Time to leave. His words cut sharper than intended. Listen, something's come up. If you could take the girls.
I'd love to take them.
Girls, he called out. It's time to go.
We're leaving, Mr. CJ?
Anna asked, skipping with her endless energy. He put a hand on Anna's head. Yes, Mrs. Collins is going to take you back to the ladies at the shelter. Angela hugged herself.
Did the pictures help?
He squatted down and drew Angela into a hug. The pictures helped more than you know. Thank you for being so brave. She lunged at him, wrapping her tiny arms around his neck.
You mean we did it? You're going to bring Mommy home?
Hope and despair warred with each other in Angela's expression, and a tear pooled at the corner of her eye. He wrapped her in a hug, pulling her close. I hope so. He prayed he wasn't lying and would find Henrietta Jones alive.
Mr. CJ?
Angela said with a whisper.
I didn't like the man because he smelled funny. Does that help?
It didn't help at all, but he wanted her to think she was helping. Yes, that helps. Men can be stinky sometimes. Angela shook her head.
Not stinky.
She wrinkled her nose.
He smelled like dirt, and he had lipstick smeared on his face. The bright red kind Mom doesn't like. He made me feel funny, too.
She pulled her shoulders inward. Her voice dropped so low he had to lean forward to hear her whisper.
He looked at my...
From the way she crossed her arms over her prepubescent chest, CJ had no difficulty finishing that thought. You did very well today, Angela.
Will the pictures help find my mom?
He shouldn't be nodding, because there was no reason to give her false hope. But his head moved.
Thank you,
she said in her soft whisper. Anna launched herself at him, joining her sister in the hug.
Mr. CJ!
Her squeal aggravated his headache, but he pulled her close and gave them a combined hug. Come, girls, we need to get moving. He herded them to Mrs. Collins's car, transferred the child seats, and ensured they were buckled in. With a nod, he gave his thanks to Mrs. Collins and waved goodbye to the girls. Then he headed to the hotel. On the way, he phoned Mac. Jenny answered.
Hey, CJ.
Status update?
Mac wanted to wait until you got here to go in, but I told him we needed to get started.
CJ agreed. There was no reason to wait. I'll be there in a few minutes. What have you found so far?
The room's clean,
Jenny said.
Whoever did this planned well.
There has to be something. Surveillance? Cleaning and room service staff?
Brett and John are talking with the staff, and Charlie is with the hotel security to see if anyone saw anything.
Brett Parmley and John Nutt were top-notch. Charlie Malden was a relatively new addition to the team, recruited not from the military, but from Forrest Summers' facility. The facility was something like a halfway house for people Forrest rescued. They received counseling along with intense self-defense training. He liked what he'd seen so far in Charlie's skills, enthusiasm, and a unique outlook. Police. He was curious how involved they might be given how stretched thin they were.
They're sending a detective, and the feds are coming online since Patterson is likely involved.
The man with the roses was connected to Henrietta's disappearance and tied to Melissa's as well. He didn't like what that might mean. I have a lead on the Henrietta Jones case. 45. Video. CJ. CJ crowded into an elevator along with a family of 4, an elderly couple and 2 teenage lovebirds. By the time he reached the 18th floor, he was alone. A small crowd had gathered, and police tape blocked the way to Melissa's room. Down the hall, he spied Max speaking to a cop. His friend waved and came toward him. How are you holding up? Give me an update and I'll be doing much better. He released a pent-up sigh. We found something. What? You need to see this. Mac led him to the hotel room, holding the ribbon of yellow tape out of the way. A local cop stood outside the door and gave them a nod. And no sign of a struggle? CJ rubbed his jaw. None. Looks like she let whoever it was in, so I figure she knew him. Do you think it was her ex-husband?
We don't think so.
Jenny turned as they entered the suite. The look on her face telegraphed her concern.
Charlie is downstairs with security. We're checking to see if Patterson was anywhere in the building. She's getting the tapes as we speak. The problem is, they don't monitor the halls.
Shit. He rubbed his hand over his head. Show me what you found.
Your little lovebird is a smart cookie. She left us a crumb. I have to say I'm impressed, but you're not going to like it.
What did you find? Breath tugged into his lungs. Had she been hurt?
I found her phone.
His pulse jackhammered. They wouldn't be able to GPS her phone.
She set the video to record, then shoved it under the bed.
Jenny said.
Good thing, because this guy did some cleanup work, but missed her phone.
Jenny sat him down on the couch.
You ready to see this?
No. He took a measured breath and used it to calm the tension wound in his body. Focus on the clues. Don't worry about the unknown. Sage advice he'd given to those he'd trained, but hard as hell to accomplish when the victim was someone he cared about. Yes, he said. His palms were a nervous mess, cool and clammy. He wiped them on his pants. His normally slow and steady heart chugged along like a freight train, and breathing deep wasn't helping. She pulled out Melissa's phone and queued up a video. The footage jerked all around, but Melissa was lying on the floor. A flash of brown wrapped around her wrists, and what looked to be a chain lead ran down her legs where there were more cuffs. He leaned forward, pulse pounding with a need to punish whoever had done this to Melissa.
Just wait.
Jenny soothed.
Watch.
All he could see was Melissa's ragged gasps, but he forced himself to remain professional and focus on the details. His mouth went dry as a pair of men's shoes moved into the frame. It was hard to tell because the lighting was terrible. Melissa moaned, struggling to free herself. Then a man's voice sounded. Shh, don't fight, don't worry, I have you.
What are you doing?
Melissa's voice sounded slurred, drugged perhaps. It's going to be all right. The man knelt. Impossible to tell what he was doing, except Melissa struggled before going still. And fuck it, but there wasn't a clear view of his face. All they had were his damned shoes.
He drugged her.
Jenny said.
Easier to get her out of the room.
CJ nodded. It made sense. The man moved around the room. Something big and white flapped. Then a door opened and shut. That's how he got her out, he said.
Exactly. It looks like a laundry or valet cart. It's the only thing large enough to put her in.
And no one saw anything? You said the security cameras didn't monitor the guest hallways?
That's what they told us. But they monitor the exit points and common areas. Charlie is working on getting us copies.
We need to look at their delivery docks and canvass the cleaning staff about anyone pushing a cart who didn't belong. Someone must have seen something.
Already on it.
Jenny pulled out her cell phone. And we need to show these around. CJ handed her the sketches. The video wasn't much, but the strength of foresight Melissa showed in setting the phone to record amazed the hell out of him. Jenny examined the sketches.
Charlie has the security folks wrapped around her finger. They're cooperating. Who is this?
A man the girl's mother was talking to at the park. And I've seen him before. He was at the hospital when I picked up Melissa. Jenny tapped her finger over the paper.
I've seen him too.
She squinted.
Now where have I seen this guy?
She glanced at the ceiling, frustration edging her tone.
I hate it when this happens.
Hello, this is Ellie Masters. I hope you're enjoying this free audio exclusive of Rescuing Melissa. A spine-tingling thriller and steamy romance all rolled into one, and I like to think of it as romantic suspense meets Silence of the Lambs. We've made it through 45 chapters, and the worst of the worst has finally happened. Melissa's been taken by crazy Prince Charming, aka Pierce, and now CJ has 2 women to rescue. Fortunately, he is up to the task with the top-notch team of Delta backing him up. There are 65 chapters altogether, which means we're about 2/3 of the way through. Make sure you don't miss out on the rest of Rescuing Melissa. Like and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to tap that bell to be notified when new chapters are posted for your audio reading enjoyment. If you're enjoying the story, please share with your reading buddies and other audiophiles, and let me know what you think in the comments. While waiting for more, you can check me out at elliemasters.com, and you can find all my books at elliemasters.com/Amazon. If you are a Kindle Unlimited subscriber, you can read all my books for free. Until next time, this is Ellie Masters, bringing you the best of romantic suspense.
We hope you have enjoyed this unabridged production of Rescuing Melissa, The Guardian Hostage Rescue Specialists, Book 1. Written by Ellie Masters. Narrated by Aubrey Vincent and Matt Haynes.